Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another edition of Get the Money Moving with me, Emma Jones, the Small Business Commissioner. And today I have a very special guest for a special episode. I'm delighted to welcome Minister McDougall, who is Minister for Small Business and Economic Transformation, in a special episode to mark 1 year on from the launch of the UK's Small Business Plan. So, Minister, a warm welcome to this podcast series.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming. So, Minister, you have been in place as the Minister for Small Business and Economic Transformation since September 2025. I've never asked you this, but I would love to know, what has been your greatest moment to date since being in role?
Well, it's good timing on this, Emma. The thing I love about this job is you're constantly meeting small business people who have had that spark of creativity, that moment of inspiration that has become their economic niche. People who are doing things that you think, how on earth did you think of that as a business idea? And that's inspiring, but it also makes you think, well, imagine all the other ideas that are out there that don't come to fruition, that don't become, either small businesses in the community or actually the fast-growing businesses that become a whole new industry within the economy. And the gap, so much of the time between that idea and reality, is money. And we're talking today as the Chancellor is announcing an enormous expansion of the backing that we give to banks to make lending possible for small businesses. So that feels like a highlight. It feels like the most significant thing we've done in that space in many, many years. And as I say, it's exciting because what it means is that those sparks of ideas, those moments of inspiration will actually become real businesses.
Amazing. So we've caught you on a really good day today.
Caught me on a very good day today. I'm happy today.
I love it. Well, let's go back a year, because I mentioned this is a special episode to cover the launch of the Small Business Plan, which was in July 2025. Minister, talk us through some of the measures in that plan and how they've been delivered since the launch of the plan itself.
Well, the centrepiece when we launched that plan, as you know, was around late payments. So the huge injustice where large companies, or some large companies, are using smaller companies as a source of free credit, holding back growth, costing time and money for small businesses. In terms of progress there, we now have the legislation going through Parliament. I'm so looking forward to standing at the dispatch box and talking about that. We've spoken, Emma, about my own experience as a small business owner, hitting refresh on the bank account to see if the invoices had been paid. So that was the centrepiece. But then there were a whole set of other commitments, about 200 other commitments that we've made progress on. That covers everything from lifting lots of small companies out of some of the unnecessary red tape, some of the reporting that they would have to do in their annual reports and accounts. But also a lot of things that we don't think of as being maybe specific to small businesses, but things in society which particularly affect small business owners. So, for example, are aimed to half the cost of childcare for everyone who has a child. It's particularly important to small business people who are so strapped for time and find it difficult to juggle family life and business. And then there's a whole other set of things, some of which we've already announced, but some of which you'll see coming in a high street strategy, for example, tackling the bogus businesses that are forcing really valued independent retailers out of high streets. So I think one of the great things about that small business strategy is the breadth of its ambition. It looks at some of those fundamental things like access to finance and cash flow with late payments, but it recognises that because small businesses are the majority of businesses, because it's 2/3 of employment, you have to have that really across society approach if you're going to help small businesses to grow and succeed.
Lovely. I totally agree. And you've mentioned your passion for prompt payment. And as you say, we're kind of taking the bill through Parliament, which would move the UK to 60-day maximum payment terms and interest. And of course, at the office, we always feel that the best form of cash flow in a business is simply getting paid.
Yeah.
But as you said in your introductory comments, so much around small business realisation is access to external finance. So, Minister, if you don't mind, just kind of maybe share with us a little of what's being announced today in terms of this expansion of capital for small businesses.
So we reckon there is a finance gap for small businesses of between £1.5 billion to £4 billion. So that is businesses who would like to get finance to back that idea, that new product, but aren't able to do it. Today's announcement sees us increase the amount of lending going out to small businesses by £2 billion. So that makes a huge step forward in closing that gap. And a lot of small businesses won't realise when they go to their high street bank or to one of the new online lenders that actually the lending they get is underwritten by government. We, to try and make the cash flow a little bit more smoothly, underwrite the risk for the banks. We say if this goes wrong, we will take some of that risk on. And that's what we're doing today. A huge expansion of that, what we call the growth guarantee scheme, the underwriting of those loans, that we reckon will result in about 12,000 more loans going out to businesses. So it is in this space, in the space of ensuring access to finance to small businesses, the biggest thing in a very, very long time. And it's exciting, as I said earlier, because what it will mean is ideas for businesses becoming reality.
Brilliant. And we all want to kind of see that. And I often say that the mission that we're on at the office is making life easier for small businesses by getting money flowing and into their hands. So this is another wonderful way of getting money flowing into the hands of small firms through lending, debt and equity, which is amazing. Wonderful. Thank you for that. Now, Minister, of course, when small businesses want to access finance and grow and do other things, they look for support in order to get that. So give us your view on the business growth service that was also launched when the small business plan came out and how that's developing.
So I think you see with the business growth service an attempt to deal with the problem I remember when I was a small business person, which is having 20 tabs open on your browser as you desperately search for, well, which bit of government actually do I need to go to get help with problem X or opportunity Y? And what the Business Growth Service is bringing together the whole range of all the different things government does with and for business under that one portal. And there's more and more going on there all the time. And the idea there is we know that businesses that access advice and support grow faster. There's a sort of common sense to that, but we also know that there is a real time barrier to getting that advice. If you go onto the website, if you start Google searching for ChatGPTing to try to find that answer and you don't find it quickly, a customer comes in, you've got a million other things on your to-do list and you've got to get on with it. So it's really important through the Business Growth Service that we channel everything down, that we personalise it more and more so that when you go onto the Business Growth Service, when you eventually log on to that, you get deeply personalised advice and support that will help you grow. And you mentioned at the beginning access to finance. A great example of trying to improve that is the British Business Bank's Finance Finder. That landscape is often very confusing. Who do I go to for what type of financial support? You can go there and get directed to the right place so that you're not wasting time chasing applications or prospects that turn out to be a dead end.
Brilliant. So two great websites to go to. You mentioned time a lot, and I know you know this, but small businesses want to spend their time productively on growth. So, of course, one other thing that can sap their time is overburdensome regulation. So,
Yes.
Minister, you're co-chairing a regulatory task force that's working at pace. Just tell us about the work of the task force and what you want to achieve from that.
Yeah, so as well as overseeing small business, I oversee our regulation strategy. And as a government, we've said we want to reduce the administrative burden, the cost of that red tape, by just short of £6 billion, by about a quarter of what we think the cost is. And as I do that work across government, I'm always asking the question, what does that mean for small business? Now, that's partly because most businesses are small. And if you want to cut red tape, you've got to reach that majority of businesses, vast majority of businesses who are small. But also, if you get regulation right for small business, you're getting it right for everyone. If a sole trader or a medium enterprise is able to handle the regulation, it works for everyone, and you help the whole economy to flow. But often those small businesses, they don't have access to the public affairs people or the big legal department, which for those larger enterprises makes the argument for the regulation that holds back innovation and the invention, new products and things like that. So we're having a very specific look at those small businesses and the regulatory burdens that they in particular face. I think we're on to our second meeting of that very kind of rapid task force work that you mentioned. And we're coming up with really fascinating things which are just a time suck. An unnecessary time suck for small businesses. And I think we'll come up with some really helpful ways to make things just a little bit easier for entrepreneurs.
Amazing. Minister, you mentioned that large companies have public policy teams and kind of corporate affairs teams. And so therefore they do quite often get their voice heard in the heart of government. How are you making sure as small business minister that the voice of small businesses is heard in policy making and in the work that you do?
So the task force is a great example of that, of getting into the habit of constantly asking that question as a minister, what does this mean for small business? And we're doing that across the board. So when we look at different elements of the industrial strategy, when we're talking about these huge investments we're making to try to create the industries of the future, when we're talking about, for example, the investment we're putting into defence, always asking, what does that mean for small companies and what does that mean for challenger, innovative companies who don't always get a fair shake? We have, as well as that habit of asking that question, we also have various forums where small businesses are represented and constantly have that opportunity to speak to us. But if I'm honest, the most helpful thing for me, and it's what I try to do on Thursdays on my way home from London to my constituency in Scotland, is to go and meet with small businesses. So I had a great session last Thursday with small businesses in Macclesfield, and I always say when I sit around the table with them, be as critical as you can be, really unburden yourself with the things that are making your life more difficult as you run that small business, because then I'm able to take that back here into Whitehall and to make the case for making things, as I say, just a little bit easier. And that's what I see my job as. Like small business people, entrepreneurs are not afraid of hard work. Running a small business should be all-encompassing. It should be a passion project, but it can be a little bit easier. And I think that's where I'm off with my ears open, trying to find the ways to make things just a little bit easier.
Amazing. Love it. So my final question, Minister, we've caught you on a good day where there's going to be a big expansion of capital going to small businesses. But if you look ahead to the next 12 months, what are the kind of things on your to-do list that you'd love to achieve?
So I was thinking about this earlier on, and I think it's about three C's. So I think it's about cash flow, costs, and celebration. So
love that. Love that.
So on the cash flow point and cash in general point, making sure people are aware of those opportunities for the increased finance, beginning to get a sense in the wider economy that the changes we're working on late payments are coming. So people need to get out ahead of that. So my hope is far in advance of the legislation being in place, we see that acceleration in the culture change that's already happening with larger companies paying at smaller companies. I think on the cost point, it's a thing small businesses say over and over and over again. I'm working really hard. I've got great customers. The costs are killing me. And we've got to make more progress on things like business rates, red tape, energy costs. And that's going to be a huge focus going forward. And that final C of celebration, business ultimately is about the bottom line, right? It is about cash. But people also want to feel valued. Business is something people put their heart and soul into it. The people, their customers, their staff are not just items on a spreadsheet. They are people who businesses are so personally committed to, and often they don't feel recognised by that. I was at a great reception with His Majesty the King last week with people who had won the King's Award for Enterprise. That's one example of it. We're expanding that to recognise young founders through the King's Award. But a priority for me is to make sure that across the board as a country, we feel like a nation that recognises and celebrates the contribution that entrepreneurs make, because we want to have that culture in this country of celebrating people who take risks. Because without that sort of buccaneering spirit of entrepreneurs, all of those wider things that people like me in government want to achieve goes nowhere. So we've got to celebrate it. We've got to make people feel valued as they are on that often quite isolating, quite lonely journey of being a small business person. We've got to support them on the way.
I love that. Cash flow, costs and celebration. And I think I'm seeing you later today, actually, at a celebration around young founders.
Indeed.
And so you are also making sure that kind of the next generation have these right conditions. Minister, you're an amazing champion for small business within Whitehall, externally, outside in the market. It's wonderful to have spoken to you today, and we have every faith that you will deliver all those measures in that small business plan that was announced last year. So thanks so much for your time, and thanks for all the work you do on behalf of small businesses. Thank you, Minister.
And thank you for all your help and support, Emma.
Lovely. Thank you, Minister. Have the good rest of your day.
And you.